Rabbi.
What do you got for me today, Masha?
Well, Rabbi, of course you've heard the Ariana Grande song, God is a Woman, right?
Oh, I listen to it every day.
Of course, why wouldn't you? And so I've been thinking, there's this whole tradition of considering God as a man. Where did that come from?
Ah, it's a really good question. I think there's two places I know about. One of them is simply grammar. In the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew is a gendered language, and so to refer to anything, not just people, but even objects, you got to choose a gender, and there's no neuter, so you got to choose one. And so in the Bible, they did choose the masculine singular for God, except one of the weird things is that some of the words they use for the name of God are actually plural words, and yet they take the singular verb tenses. So it's a little bit like our modern phenomenon of using they as a singular for trans folks. That's actually what they do in the Torah for God,
Hmm.
but that doesn't really answer the question, I think, of why would they choose male pronouns in the first place, or why would they choose male verbs in the first place? And the way I look at it is that it's about metaphor.
Hmm.
That this whole idea of God, of there being some power in the universe or some supreme being, or however you're going to think about it, which frankly, the Bible is not so clear on how they think about it. Um, it's about how do you find metaphors that get at what you want.
Hmm.
And I think for people in the ancient world, when they thought of metaphors that were about power, they thought of male words, right? They thought of words like king and lord,
Hmm.
uh, those words that are really in their times, in their situations, that was who had the power.
Hmm.
So males have the power. God must be among those who have the power, or better, a metaphor for God. Better metaphor for God would be those who have the power. There are other instances, like even in the Torah, there are other names for God that actually are feminine. Words like the word spirit, which is sometimes used for God,
Hmm.
is actually in Hebrew can be either masculine or feminine, which is kind of interesting. There's not very many words like that. Um, and there's a couple of words like the word Shaddai, which is a word applied to God, which its root is in the root for breast. So it's a very much a nurturing word, an idea of God as the feminine is built into that. And then later on, the word Shekhinah, which means sort of God's presence, is in fact a feminine word.
Hmm.
Uh, so there is some counterbalance there. I think it's a combination maybe of people initially feeling like those power words were male words, and then succeeding generations, which were big surprise, also patriarchal societies.
Big surprise.
Big surprise that they were choosing those ones, right? They could have emphasized the feminine ones, but they didn't. They
Hmm.
chose the male ones. And it's not another no big surprise that most of those people doing the choosing were men. And so now seeing God reflected in themselves was something they had a vested interest in.
Hmm. So does it make sense for God to have a gender at all?
I mean, I personally don't think so. It's actually, I remember there was a panel when I was in rabbinical school of students to talk about the question of what words we use in prayer, and basically my position was for God we shouldn't be using gendered pronouns at all, or maybe we should alternate since there's no choice in Hebrew. We should alternate to make it clear that God is neither a man nor a woman.
Hmm.
But when we're referring in the prayers to people, well, people do have gender. And so it might make sense. Again, you want to be inclusive in your talk about gendered of people. But in terms of God, one of the books that I used to read to my kids when they were really little was talked about what is God. And one of the really strong things it said is God is not a man and God is not a woman. And I remember that my kids, like going to bed at night when they were 3, they would look up at me and say, Daddy, God is not a man. It's like, that's right. And God's not a woman. I was like, okay, good, got it. Yeah, but there's no reason to assume that gender, the categories of gender would apply to God, or that that's a useful thing to do, except I think maybe to counteract the centuries of referring to God only with power words that applied to men.
Hmm.
Then maybe there is something about talking about the feminine side of God, or applying these words which are about qualities traditionally associated with women, like nurturing, and saying like that if there is a power in the universe that is greater than all others, then I guess it must include those things as well, and maybe those things more than some of those other things, which maybe a lot of the things about ruling over might really be human projections on God rather than getting at something about God's essential nature.
So let me get this clear. Ariana Grande is not wrong. She's just not fully right.